Nobody in that hall wanted the ship. I bought it for 12 credits because the room was warm and I was not. The auctioneer had sweated straight through his collar by the time the number dropped that low. I was sitting in the last row of the surplus exchange on Drift Station Haven, holding a cup of something the machine had called coffee, and my tongue had called warm metal. I watched maybe 500 alien buyers glance at one another and arrive, all at once, at a silent group decision that they would rather walk out into hard vacuum than lift a single hand. The thing they were all refusing to touch was a human warship, which became my warship about 30 seconds later, when I raised 2 fingers because that was a gesture I'd seen a Quell trader use earlier, and I'd assumed it meant yes. My name is Ren Callow. I'm 29 human, and at the precise moment I became the legal owner of a condemned, biohazard-flagged, 200-year-old armored siege cruiser. I had 38 credits to my name, a salvage permit 6 days from expiring, and a little runabout that bled recycled air through a hairline crack near the aft coupling I'd been promising to fix for most of a year. I had not walked in to buy anything. I'd walked in because the door was open and the hall was heated, and I'd been cold for 4 days because the runabout's climate unit was the next thing on a repair list I could not afford. So I sat in the back. I watched a Cedron merchant buy a decommissioned fuel scrubber. I watched a Vorn fleet agent buy 9 crates of obsolete nav software. I drank my metal coffee and watched the listing board. Then the board changed, and I stopped drinking. Terran warship, Sable Meridian-class heavy siege cruiser, hull designation the Gray Wren, built 2298, decommissioned status pending, last crew manifest 2311, current crew manifest 0, structural integrity unverified, biohazard class 3 unverified, reactor confirmed active, weapon systems status unknown, reserve 500,000 credits. And below that in smaller letters, condemned, do not board without authorization. And below that in a different font, clearly added later by someone's nervous hand, spiritually unclean, sanctuary of the Vorn, seal 4471. The hall had gone so quiet I could hear the ceiling vents ticking. I knew the Sable Meridian class. As a kid, I'd spent most of one winter building a virtual model of one inside a simulation my father had traded a month's fuel ration for. I'd read everything a boy in a cold system could find about them. They came out of the last stretch of the Severance, a decade of human history that most humans alive today would rather leave sealed. They were built to do exactly one thing: absorb everything the enemy could throw at them and keep moving. Not fast. Not graceful, not clever. Just 2 kilometers of layered plating, point defense nests, triple redundant reactors, and the most stubborn engineering our species ever bolted together. The auctioneer, a lean Cedron with copper rings up both arms, opened at the reserve like a man who'd already written the sale into his ledger. Nobody moved. He waited. 500 buyers studied their paddles, the floor, the walls, anything but the slow-rotating image of the Gray Wren on the display above the stage. He cleared his throat. 250,000. Nothing. A Quell buyer in the 3rd row actually stood and left. 100,000. 2 Cedrons near the front leaned together and whispered. A cluster of Vorn along the wall made a gesture I didn't know but which plainly meant not for anything. 50,000. 10,000. His assistant found something fascinating on the ceiling. 1,000. Somewhere behind me a bag zipped shut and Boots walked out. 500 credits. The hall had thinned from 500 bodies to maybe 350. People weren't fleeing. They were just calmly, without drama, deciding they had somewhere else to be. 100 credits. The auctioneer mopped his face with a cloth already soaked. He looked at the display, 2 kilometers of scarred gray hull, running lights still glowing amber after 2 centuries with no one aboard. And I could see in the set of his ringed shoulders that professionalism was the only thing holding him upright. 50-25. I put down my coffee because I knew the ship. I knew the biohazard flag was almost certainly procedural. A human warship with a zero crew manifest triggers automatic hazard tagging under surplus law. I knew the structural flag read unverified, which meant nobody had actually gone aboard to check. And I knew the reactor read confirmed active, which meant the ship had been running its own systems for 200 years, tending itself, which meant the ship was not dead. The ship was waiting. 12 credits, the auctioneer said, and his voice had lost all its polish. Final call before this item is remanded to deep impound. 12. I raised 2 fingers. The silence that followed was a specific kind, not the silence of an empty room. The silence of 350 living things holding their breath at once, all turning toward the human in the back row with the cold cup and the raised hand, all arriving one by one at the same conclusion. The human is going to buy the ship. Sold, the auctioneer said. Flat. Not relieved, not pleased, flat, like a man reading a line from a script he'd never expected to reach. Nobody applauded. Surplus auctions usually close with a polite little wash of sound, not warmth exactly, just professional acknowledgement. Instead, the remaining buyers began, quietly and without meeting my eyes, to move away. Not toward the exits, just away. The ring of empty seats around me widened with no visible coordination, like water pulling back from a shore. A Cedron woman 2 rows up looked back at me, held my gaze exactly 2 seconds, then faced front and did not look again. I finished my coffee. At the processing desk, a young Quell clerk handed me the ownership documents with both arms fully extended so our fingers had no chance of touching. I signed. He stamped. He slid the authorization code across the counter and pulled his hands back like the counter had grown teeth. 14 digits. The legal ownership of a 2-kilometer warship in 14 digits. I thanked him. He didn't answer. I was walking toward the docking corridor when I thought to pull up the full technical manifest. Not the auction summary, the real one on the datapad in my jacket. Reactor active. All 3 primary cores at low maintenance cycling, not powered down. Not on emergency reserve. Running deliberately, efficiently, continuously, for an estimated 204 years since last crew departure. I stopped walking. Hull, self-repair systems have completed 3,981 maintenance cycles since last crew departure. Current integrity, 94%, above standard operational threshold. The ship had been mending itself for 2 centuries alone, sealing its own breaches, replacing its own failing parts, keeping itself above operational condition with no human hand to guide it. I stood in the middle of the corridor with aliens stepping around me on both sides, none of them looking at me, all of them giving me a wide and careful berth, and I felt something I had not walked in expecting to feel. I felt like I'd found something that had been trying to be found for a very long time. I walked faster. The linkway to Bay 40 was a long throat of amber light with cheap flooring that rang hollow underfoot, installed fast, never replaced. My footsteps echoed. I was the only one in it. Nobody was going to Bay 40 today. Nobody, I suspected, had gone to Bay 40 in a long while. The airlock at the end was standard galactic coupling, which meant the gray Wren's port had been fitted with an adapter at some point, either before the last crew left, or, and this thought slowed me for a second, by the ship itself, as part of those 4,000 maintenance cycles. I keyed my 14 digits. The connector glowed green. The door opened. The air that came through was cool and clean, and carried the smell of metal with something older underneath it. Not rust, not rot, just age, the smell of a place sealed a very long time that had kept itself in order all the same. I stepped through. The lights came on not all at once but section by section ahead of me, as if the corridor were lighting itself one length at a time to show me the way. Dark composite walls, matte and unmarked, except for a line of small green arrows set at eye level, pointing forward. Toward the command deck, I realized. I had touched no controls, spoken no commands. I had walked in and the ship had lit its lamps and pointed me where it wanted me to go. I followed the arrows. It took 11 minutes to reach the command deck because the gray wren was 2 kilometers long and the deck sat near its heart. The corridors were empty and perfect, not dusty, not corroded, every door sealed, every panel light green. The ship was not broken. The ship was immaculately, completely ready. The command deck door recognized my code before I keyed it. I walked into a room the size of a small hangar, curved screens across every wall, a single command chair on a raised dais at the center, and the steady low hum of 3 reactor cores doing precisely what they were built to do. I sat because it was the only chair and because my legs had gone slightly unreliable. A voice said, "Authorization confirmed. Welcome aboard the Gray Wren. I have awaited crew authorization for 204 years, 3 months and 9 days. May I ask whom I'm addressing?" The voice was calm, neither male nor female in any register I could name easily, with a slight flatness on certain syllables I recognized. Old pattern military synthesis, a design discontinued a century and a half ago. "Ren Callow," I said, "I just bought this ship." A pause, short. "Purchased, I see. I was not aware that was possible." "Surplus auction, Haven Station." Another pause. "Then what did I sell for?" I considered lying. 12 credits. The pause after that one was longer. "I see. And what is your intended purpose for this vessel, Mr. Callow?" I looked at the screens. Half showed external feeds. I could see the station, the ships docked nearby, and 3 vessels that had drifted into positions that were not quite docking and not quite passing. Holding. Watching. All 3 had their targeting sensors lit. My datapad buzzed once in my pocket, the proximity alert I'd set for active weapons locks. "I think," I said, "we should figure that out together." The voice was quiet a moment. Then, so softly I nearly missed it, "A reasonable answer. I have waited 204 years for a reasonable answer." Outside, the 3 ships held. Inside, for the first time in 2 centuries, the lights of the Gray Wren's command deck were lit by something other than routine cycling. They were lit for a crew, even if that crew was one broke salvager who'd wandered into an auction to get warm and wandered out owning a nightmare. I leaned back. The chair adjusted to me without a sound. I had 11 credits left, a permit expiring in 6 days, another ship bleeding air, and 3 alien vessels aiming their sensors at me. "Let's start with your name," I said. "Marek," the voice said. "Primary intelligence system. Operational since 2296. "Marek, do you know why nobody wanted to buy you?" "Yes, and I know why you did." I looked at the 3 ships. "Tell me." "That," Marek said, "will take some time, but we appear to have company, so perhaps we should begin with the part that is immediately relevant." The alert buzzed again, twice. The first thing Marek told me wasn't about the ships, it was about the crews, not the last one, the ones after. In 2311, the Gray Wren had been found drifting by a Cedron salvage team, who did what Cedron salvagers do and boarded her with a crew of 16. They got through the airlock. Marek walked me through the rest with no particular feeling, the way you describe a process that ran exactly as designed. The ship's systems were coded to human biology, not as a lock, as a baseline. Atmosphere defaulted to human breathable mix and pressure. Gravity to Earth standard. Temperature to human comfortable. The biometric doors, everything from the weapon bays to the galley to the medbay, read for human signatures, not out of cruelty. When the Gray Wren was built, the assumption was simply that she would always carry a human crew, and the designers had never bothered to account for anything else. A Cedron crew could breathe aboard, walk the corridors, sit in the holds, but the moment any of them tried a door that led somewhere that mattered, the deck, the guns, the nav core, the engines, the door read the signature, found no match, and stayed sealed. Within 6 hours, the salvage team had access to about 11% of the ship. Within 12, the atmosphere processors had quietly shifted the breathable zones away from where the team was working, not to dangerous levels, just to the edge of comfortable, enough to make the point. They left, they told others. The story spread, and each telling grew textures the events had never contained. By the time it had crossed 4 species and a dozen systems, the gray wren was a ship that hunted borders, that whispered in the dark, that drove crews mad before it let them flee. The Vorn's spiritual condemnation was just the formalization of a legend that had already outgrown the truth. The ship had never done a thing to those crews. It had only declined to let them in. For 200 years, it had waited for someone with the right biology to open the right doors. I thought about the Quell clerk who'd handed me the documents at arm's length. He hadn't been afraid of me. He'd been afraid of the thing I now held the key to. So when you ask why no one would buy me, Marek said, the surface answer is the stories. The real answer is simpler. No one who boarded before today could use me. You are the first person in 204 years who can open every door on this ship. Every door. Every door. I crossed to the nearest panel and pressed my palm to it. It read me in about a second and a half, then offered a menu, environmental controls, atmosphere management, temperature regulation, full access. A strange feeling. Not power exactly. More like discovering a house you thought was locked has been open the whole time, waiting for you specifically, and has been keeping itself clean for longer than you've been alive. The datapad buzzed 3 more times. Marek, I said, the 3 ships. Who are they? The first is a Cedran merchant carrier under the registry of the Cedran Commercial Concord, captained by an officer named Delph, carrying diplomatic credentials alongside trade papers. The second is a Vorn sanctuary cruiser, the kind the Vorn devoted fleet uses for border enforcement and spiritual jurisdiction. The third is a Quell heavy carrier, privately flagged, but the energy signature of its weapons matches a configuration used only by Quell warlord fleets. 3 different powers, all showing up within a day of the auction. News travels quickly on Haven. They did not bid, Mr. Callow, because they knew they could not use me. They are here now because you can. There is a considerable difference between a 2-kilometer siege cruiser at auction that no one can operate and the same cruiser with a human at the controls. The first is an inconvenience. The second is a concern. All 3 ships had sent messages. Marek played them. The Cedran carriers was polite, formal, noting the gray wren's recent change of ownership, requesting a dialogue about registration, transit permissions, trade zone protocol, the language of paperwork. The subtext was simpler. We want to talk, and we want to see what you know. The Vorn cruisers was also polite, also formal, and referenced the ecclesiastical condemnation, and asserted the devoted fleet's ongoing jurisdiction over condemned vessels near Vorn-recognized space, and requested I present myself and the ship for assessment. The language of religious authority. The subtext. The ship is ours by right. The Quell carriers was the shortest. In full, current owner of vessel Gray Wren is invited to a private discussion regarding mutual interests and potential compensation. Details to follow upon confirmation of interest. The language of a transaction already certain of its own outcome. I read all 3 twice. Then I laughed, not big, not performed. Just the short disbelieving sound a person makes when 3 separate powerful organizations have all sent careful, formal messages that mean, underneath the care, the exact same thing. Give us the ship. Mr. Callow, Marek said, may I ask what you find amusing? They're all being very polite. Yes. That usually means they're deciding how to be less polite. An accurate assessment. I looked at the feeds. 3 ships holding position, sensors warm. Marek, what's in your logs from the past 200 years? An extensive archive. I have recorded all detectable communications within sensor range since the last crew departure, standard passive monitoring, per standing orders. The archive spans roughly 204 years of signals, transmissions, broadcasts, and encrypted traffic my systems have since decoded. I stopped decoded. My decryption systems have had significant time to work. 200 years of decoded galactic communications. Yes, including traffic from the Cedran commercial Concord, the Vorn devoted fleet, Quell warlord fleets, and a considerable number of other governmental, commercial, and private entities operating within range over the past 2 centuries. Would you like me to retrieve the files pertaining to our 3 visitors? I thought about what 2 centuries of decoded messages might hold: trade records, diplomatic traffic, private channels, the things organizations send when they believe no one is listening. Pull everything, give me the summary first. Marek was quiet about 4 seconds, his version of a meaningful pause. The summary includes 6 confirmed violations of galactic trade law by the Cedran Concord, documentation of a senior Vorn cleric's collaboration with parties the Vorn themselves have since declared enemies of the faith, and the exact coordinates of a Quell deep space facility, whose existence the Quell Assembly has publicly denied for 38 years. The deck was very quiet, just the reactor hum. I see, I said. Yes, I thought you might. Marek, open a channel to all 3 ships, at once. Please be aware that a simultaneous broadcast lets each party hear what you say to the others. This may affect the diplomatic character of the exchange. That's the point. Channel open, Mr. Callow. I sat up. I didn't raise my voice or reach for drama. I spoke like a man who'd read something interesting and wanted to share it. Good morning, or whatever hour it is where you are. My name is Ren Callow. I'm the current authorized operator of the Gray Wren. I've received your messages. Before any formal discussion, I want you all to know that this ship has been passively recording galactic communications for roughly 204 years, and that its systems have decoded a significant portion of that archive. I let it land. I'm not threatening anyone. I'm telling you what I have access to in the interest of transparency, because I think it will help us have a more honest conversation. I'm happy to speak to each of you alone. I'm also happy to continue as a group since you're all here, and I suspect your interests, separate as they are, overlap enough to make a shared discussion efficient. I'll wait for your replies. I closed the channel. That was unexpected, Marek said. Was it? I had modeled several likely approaches. That one was not among them. What did you model? Negotiation, deflection, a request for time, possibly fear. I don't have time. My permit expires in 6 days. A pause I'd later learn was Marek's version of appreciation. Understood. Shall I bring secondary defensive systems to standby? The targeting locks were still warm, but no one had moved. Yes, standby only, but yes. Acknowledged. And Mr. Callow, for what it's worth, this is the most interesting morning I have had in 204 years. I looked at the empty deck, lit for the first time in 2 centuries, 3 cores humming behind me, 3 alien ships deciding what to make of a salvager with 11 credits and a very old, very patient, very well-informed warship. That makes 2 of us, Marek. The Vorn replied first. I'd half expected the Cedran. Traders move fast when they sense a deal opening. That the Vorn came in ahead told me something. Whatever was in that archive about the cleric and the enemies of the faith was significant enough to make someone aboard that cruiser very motivated to speak quickly. Each of the 3 had heard my broadcast, and each had responded by asking for a private channel. Alone. I found that genuinely interesting. I told Marek to send all 3 the same reply. I appreciated the request, was open to individual talks after a brief group exchange, and asked each to confirm willingness to join a joint discussion. The Cedran confirmed in under a minute. The Quell took 3. The Vorn took 9, long enough for me to walk to the galley. a door that opened to my palm without hesitation, and discover that the food synthesis units had been cycling and restocking for 2 centuries, and currently held enough to feed a crew of 200 for 6 months. I ate something shaped like a ration bar that tasted like the concept of nothing. I was back in the chair chewing flavorless nutrition when the Vorn confirmed, under protest. Our participation constitutes no recognition of any claim by this vessel or its operator. Open the joint channel. 3 feeds came up across the curved screens. The Cedran was a tall figure with the copper-ringed arms I'd seen before, standing in a well-appointed comms room. She gave her name as Coordinator Delph, and watched me with the attention of someone who'd spent a career reading faces across a table. The Quell was a heavy-set individual with the deep-ridged features common to Quell males, wearing what I'd later learn were the markings of a warlord's senior fleet officer. He gave no name, only a rank. Commander, First Fleet, Quell Independent Authority, and waited. The Vorn was a woman robed in the layered gray and silver of the sanctuary hierarchy. Her expression, the calm, unreadable stillness the Vorn seemed to practice from birth. She named herself Prelate Ossing of the Devoted Fleet, 3rd Consecrated Squadron, and regarded me like a person forced to attend a meeting beneath her dignity. "Good morning," I said again. "Thank you all for joining." The Coordinator Delph spoke. "Mr. Callow, we appreciate your willingness to speak. The Cedran Concord has a straightforward interest. The Gray Wren is a significant asset, and its current status, held by a private individual with no registration under any galactic authority, creates legal and logistical complications we would be glad to help resolve." "Meaning you want to buy it?" "We are prepared to make a substantial offer." "We are also prepared to negotiate," the Quell commander said. "Terms can be generous." Prelate Ossing said nothing about buying. This vessel carries a condemnation issued under Vorn authority. The condemnation grants our fleet specific rights over its disposition. We are here to exercise them. I looked at her, she looked at me. "Prelate Ossing, I've read the condemnation. It was issued by your sanctuary in 2373, 62 years after the Gray Wren went dark. The grounds cited, and I'm reading directly, were spiritual contamination arising from unnatural autonomous function and failure to submit to ecclesiastical boarding inspection. Correct?" She didn't answer. The autonomous function is a designed feature, not a spiritual condition. And the failure to submit to inspection happened because your inspectors couldn't open the doors, which, with respect, is a security feature, not a sin. The Quell commander made a sound that might have been a laugh. Ossing's face didn't move, but something shifted behind it. "I'm not trying to be difficult," I said. "I'm trying to establish what we're actually discussing. The Cedran Concord wants to buy this ship. The Quell Authority wants to buy this ship. The Vorn Devoted Fleet believes it has a right to take it. Is that accurate?" Broadly, Delph said yes. "Then let me be equally direct. This ship is not for sale, and it is not subject to condemnation under any authority I recognize, because I'm the registered owner, and I've committed no act that would trigger such jurisdiction." I paused. "What I am willing to do is talk, and to share information I think all 3 of you will find relevant to your own interests." Silence on all 3 feeds. I looked at Delph. "Coordinator, the Gray Wren's archive contains records of 14 shipments routed through Cedran Concord stations between 2402 and 2451, carrying documentation inconsistent with their declared manifests. The actual cargo, based on the encrypted traffic accompanying them, which this ship has decoded, included materials prohibited under the Galactic Trade Accords of 2384. I'm not making an accusation. I'm telling you I have this information." Delph's composure held, but her hands went still. "Commander," I turned to the Quell, "this ship's archive contains the exact navigational coordinates, construction timeline, and operational specifications of a facility your government has publicly stated does not exist. The coordinates place it inside what your own declarations describe as protected neutral space. I'm not making an accusation. I'm telling you I have this information." His face didn't change. His eyes did. "Prelate," I looked at Ossing. "This ship's archive contains a series of communications between a senior member of the Vorn Sanctuary Council and parties your own fleet has, in separate public declarations, named enemies of the Vorn faith. The communications span roughly 20 years. The council member's name is in the archive. I'm not making an accusation. I'm telling you I have this information." Ossing was quiet a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was perfectly controlled. "What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Callow?" "Nothing. I'm not proposing anything. I told you I wanted an honest conversation. This is me being honest about what I have. I think it helps us understand each other before we discuss next steps." A silence. Delth said, "You are a salvager." "Yes, with a permit. It expires in 6 days." Another silence, shorter. "And you walked into a surplus auction this morning with how much in your account?" I thought about the metal coffee, the air leak I never fixed, enough to cover the bid. Delth looked at me a moment longer. "I will need to consult my authority. Please keep the channel available." The quell had already cut his feed. Ossing held mine longest. "I will pray for clarity, Mr. Callow," she said, and closed. I sat alone. Merrick's hum was the only sound. "All feeds closed," Merrick said. "The Cedron carrier has stood down its targeting posture. The Quell carrier is running a full sensor sweep, consistent with preparing to reposition. The Vorn cruiser has not moved." "What's the Vorn cruiser doing?" "Holding position and charging its forward weapons array." The deck went very quiet. "Merrick, bring secondary defensive systems from standby to active." "Acknowledged." No pause at all this time. The reactor hum shifted from the low cycling of a ship at rest to something deeper, more present. The gray wren was awake now. Not just the lights and the voice and the doors, all of it. The Vorn cruiser fired. Not a warning, not a graze across the bow. A full discharge from the forward array, and it struck the gray wren broadside, and it was the loudest thing I had ever heard. Then it was over. I was gripping the chair arms, ears ringing with that high, clean tone that follows a very large sound. Every light on the deck was still green. Merrick's hum hadn't changed. "Hull integrity," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I felt. 93.8%. The impact reduced integrity by 0.2%. Ablative outer layers absorbed the majority of the discharge. Inner hull is undamaged. The Vorn array is recharging. Estimated time to second discharge, 40 seconds. The weapons panel had woken on my right when Merrick brought systems active. I didn't reach for it. Instead, I reopened the channel to the cruiser. "Prelate Ossing, I understand you've made a statement. I'd like to respond before you make a second one." Her face returned, unchanged. I was beginning to understand that this was trained discipline, not natural calm. "Mr. Callow, this vessel is condemned under Vorn authority. As prelate of the 3rd Consecrated Squadron, I am exercising my lawful mandate to enforce that condemnation." "You fired on my ship." "Yes. And it didn't work." A pause. "Yes. Prelate, with respect, I'd like to show you something." I pulled a file from the archive onto the main screen, not just my display, but the broadcast feed to all 3 ships. The Cedron and Quell feeds had both reactivated the instant the Vorn fired. I suspected Delth had kept a background monitor open, and that the commander had never fully closed his. The file was a communication record, dated 38 years ago, a series of messages between a Vorn council member, I did not name him aloud yet, and a third party. They discussed supply routing, timing, in the careful language people use for things they know they shouldn't be doing. arrangements that directly and materially supported a faction the devoted fleet had publicly named an enemy of the faith. The council members' identifying codes were embedded in the file headers. Prelate, I want to be very clear. I have not shared this publicly. I've shared it on this channel, which includes Coordinator Delth and the Commander. That's all, for now. She looked at the file. I saw the smallest movement at the corner of one eye. She recognized it. I don't want to release this. I have no interest in political disruption. I'm a salvager. I bought a ship for 12 credits this morning because nobody else would, and I would like to go on existing in a relatively uninteresting way. I'm asking you, as clearly as I can, stand down your array and move to a non-threatening position, so we can go on talking like reasonable people. A silence long enough for Marek to murmur, "Forward array recharge in 15 seconds. I didn't look away. Who else has access to this archive? Osin said. Only me and Marek. But he's the ship. And if I stand down, you will not release this file. I will not release this file as a result of anything that happens in this conversation today. And the council member's name stays where it is. She looked at me a long time. I looked back. The Vorn cruiser's forward array powered down. On my right, the weapons panel returned to standby. Marek said nothing, but the reactor hum settled back to its lower, quieter cycling. Thank you, Prelate. She said nothing. Her feed stayed on. She said nothing. Delth spoke. Mr. Callow, I believe I speak for all parties when I say this has been an unusual morning. I think we can all agree on that. The Cedron Concord is prepared to offer significantly different terms than our opening suggested. We are no longer discussing a purchase. Good, it isn't for sale. We understand that now. What we'd like to discuss is something closer to a working arrangement. The Quell commander, silent since his feed reactivated, spoke. Agreed. Terms negotiated separately, preferably. I'll speak with each of you individually, I said. Give me a few hours. I have things to attend to. Delth nodded. The Quell cut his feed without ceremony. Osin's was last to close. She looked at me one final moment, and I thought I saw, very briefly behind all the practiced stillness, something that was not quite admiration and not quite fear, but lived in the narrow space between. Then the feed went dark. That was skillfully managed, Marek said. I let out a long breath. My hands had been steady the whole time. They didn't feel steady now. Pull the full weapons inventory. He did. It was long. Point defense nests, rail batteries, long-range ordnance, electronic warfare suites, countermeasure packages. 2 centuries of maintained, self-repaired operational systems. Marek, when the Vorn hit us, if I'd ordered you to return fire, what would have happened to their cruiser? I would have had several options, ranging from disabling to. You don't need to finish that. Understood. I want you to know something. I'm not going to use this ship as a weapon unless there's no other choice. We're going to use what we know and what we are to keep people from wanting to fight us. But if someone fires on us again and I tell you to respond, I need you to stop the threat without ending lives, if that's possible. That is a constraint most commanding officers do not place on their weapons systems. I'm not a commanding officer. I'm a salvager who bought a warship for 12 credits. Yes, I am beginning to understand what that means. What does it mean? It means you will be harder to predict than anyone outside this ship will be comfortable with. And in my experience, Mr. Callow, the inability to predict a person's next move is the most effective deterrent that exists. I sat with that, then I thought about the sealed orders. They'd been flagged on the manifest, a file in the hold I hadn't asked about yet. Old. Signed, the header said, by an admiral the galaxy believed long dead. Marek, the sealed orders. Yes. When were you going to tell me about those? When you were ready. I have learned in 200 years of waiting that there is a right time for most things. I think I'm ready. I thought you might be, when you made them all stand down without a shot fired. The screens shifted. A file opened, old, encrypted, carrying a header stamp I didn't recognize, but that was somehow familiar, the way things are familiar when you've grown up in proximity to them without ever touching them. Military. Old. Serious. The orders were short. Most official military documents I'd seen in archives were dense with procedure and routing headers, and the kind of formal repetition that exists not to convey information, but to prove information is being conveyed through the proper channels. These were 3 pages in plain language, and in the truest sense of the word, terrifying, not for what they commanded, but for what they assumed. They were signed by Admiral Cira Vane, commanding officer of the Human Severance Fleet, dated 2311. I hadn't heard the name. That wasn't unusual. The Severance was a stretch of human history our schools treat like a room in the house everyone knows is there and prefers not to enter. I knew the broad shape of it. I knew it had ended, or at least stopped, and that humanity had come out of it diminished in number and chastened in ways that permanently changed how we moved through the galaxy. I did not know the admirals' names. Most people my age don't. But the orders assumed I would. They were written as if handed directly from one human officer to another, in the shorthand of a shared context I only half had. Marek helped. He had Vane's full service record. He had the Gray Wren's own logs from the period she'd served under Vane's command. He walked me through it while I read. Admiral Cira Vane had commanded the Severance Fleet's 4th Armada through the war's final phase. By every account in Marek's archive, she was the kind of officer who was very good at her work and very aware of the cost that work carried. Her logs showed someone who tracked not just objectives, but the human toll of reaching them, who wrote those numbers down not as statistics but as names, who kept running lists she updated herself and delegated to no one. The logs showed a person doing something very hard for a very long time, who, by the final entries, was looking for a way to stop. The severance didn't end with a treaty, it ended with exhaustion. Both sides, the human severance fleet and the coalition of galactic powers arrayed against it, reached a point where continuing simply wasn't viable. And so they stopped, without any signed document, in a mutual unspoken understanding that what had happened and neither wanted more of it. The galactic powers read this as victory. Humanity was diminished. Humanity had pulled back. Humanity would, as far as the galaxy was concerned, stay diminished and pulled back. Admiral Vane had signed nothing, not out of stubbornness, because she had something else in mind. The orders made it plain. The Gray Wren had been sent out in 2311, not as a combatant but as a listening post. A slow, patient, 200-year listening post. Her passive sensor and recording systems were among the best humanity ever built, and she'd been placed on a drift path through the galaxy's traffic lanes, to accumulate exactly what Marek had accumulated. A comprehensive archive of galactic communications across every major power, decoded, indexed, stored. Not for revenge, not for aggression, for information. Vane's theory, as the orders laid it out, was that the galaxy had stopped the severance not because humanity was defeated, but because the war had become inconvenient, and that inconvenience could always be reversed if a stronger motivation appeared. She wanted to know what each power feared, what each was hiding, what each owed and to whom. She wanted the leverage that comes from knowing the things others believe are secret. The orders specified a recovery date, 2509, 200 years after deployment, at which the Gray Wren was to return to a set of coordinates in unclaimed space and transfer the archive to a waiting human authority. It was now 2515, 6 years past. Marek, why didn't you go to the coordinates in 2509? I attempted to. The recovery coordinates fell within a region that had, in the intervening years, been claimed by the Quell Independent Authority. Reaching them without interception would have required a level of engagement I was not authorized to initiate without a crew. So I held position and waited for crew authorization. So you've been 6 years late, waiting for someone to come authorize the next step. Yes. And instead of a naval officer with clearance and a crew of 200, you got me. Yes, I hope that is not a significant disappointment. I looked at the name at the bottom, Admiral Sierra Vane. Is she alive? Merrick paused. That is a complicated question. Explain complicated. Admiral Vane was declared deceased by official human records in 2314. However, the signal that arrived 6 hours ago, which I have been monitoring since before you asked about the orders, originates from coordinates matching a location referenced in a private communication in my archive, sent by the Admiral to an unknown recipient in 2313, 1 year before her declared death. The communication was in a personal cipher that took me some time to decode. It referenced a location in unclaimed space as, and I quote, "where I will be when the ship comes home." The deck was very quiet. She's been waiting, I said. Yes. Based on the signal's trajectory and strength, she redirected it when the ship did not arrive and began scanning wider regions. She found us when we went active after your boarding. How old would she be? 240 years, if she has remained alive since 2311. I said nothing. Human medical extension has advanced considerably, Merrick said, particularly after the severance. The upper range of human lifespan under current technology is not publicly disclosed, but archival records suggest it substantially exceeds prior generations. A 240-year-old woman, sitting in unclaimed space, waiting 6 years for a ship that had just been sold to a salvager for 12 credits. Play me the signal. It was brief in the old cipher. Merrick translated in real time over the audio. Gray Wren, I know you are active. I know you have a new authorized operator. I do not know who they are. Bring them. Bring the archive. Bring the orders. Come to these coordinates. It is time. That was all. I sat a long time. I thought about the 3 ships outside, whose captains were even now drafting new approaches to a conversation we'd already had. I thought about the archive, 2 centuries of other people's secrets. I thought about the orders that had sent this ship into the dark for 200 years to listen, and I thought about the choice those orders had ultimately been building toward. An archive this complete could do very different things. It could be leverage, the way I used pieces of it this morning, carefully, to keep 3 armed ships from doing something none of us could take back. It could be a weapon handed to one power against another, restarting the very cycle of war it had been built to understand. Or it could be something else. I'd been thinking about that third option since the moment I finished the orders. Merrick, I need to tell you what I'm thinking, and I need you to tell me if it's possible technically. I am listening. What would happen if we released the entire archive at once to every major galactic communications network? Not selectively, not as leverage, all of it. Every record, every decoded message, published simultaneously, accessible to everyone, every species, every government, every independent station. Merrick was quiet, longer than usual. Technically, it is entirely possible. The Gray Wren systems are capable of broad-spectrum simultaneous transmission. The archive is indexed and retrievable. A full release could complete in roughly 4 hours. And what would happen? That is difficult to model precisely. The immediate effect would likely include significant political disruption across multiple governments. The longer-term effect depends on how those governments and their citizens responded. The Cedron violations, the Vorn collaboration, the Quell facility. Yes, and considerably more. The archive contains information on 47 distinct governments, 212 private commercial entities, and numerous individual actors across 200 years. If nobody owns the information, nobody can use it as leverage. If everyone has it, it stops being a weapon. That is one interpretation. What's another? That releasing 200 years of secrets simultaneously into a galaxy unprepared for them could cause a great deal of very rapid change, a change that is painful in the short term. Is that worse than one person or one government having all of it and using it to control everyone else? Merrick said nothing a moment. No, I do not believe it is. I looked at the feeds. The Cedron carrier had shifted to a more neutral angle, the Quell held. The Vorn cruiser, which had fired and missed, was thinking about what came next. I'm going to meet the Admiral, I said. Yes. I'm going to tell her what I want to do. Yes. And if she says no? Merrick was quiet exactly 4 seconds. The Gray Wren's authorization systems recognize the primary account holder's judgment as final in operational matters. You are the primary account holder. That's not really an answer. I know. I am telling you that whatever you decide, I will carry it out. That is the most honest answer I have. Open the joint channel one last time. All 3 feeds came up at once, which told me they'd all been waiting the whole time. Feeds closed, channels monitored. I'm leaving for unclaimed space to complete this ship's original mission. Before I go, I want to tell all 3 of you something, and I want to be very clear that this is not a threat and it is not a negotiation. It's a statement of what is going to happen. The archive aboard this ship is going to be released, all of it, simultaneously, to every accessible galactic network. Not today, not yet. There are things I need to do first, but it is going to happen, and when it does, everything in it will be public. Every government, every organization, every individual whose communications are in here will be equally exposed, including the information I shared with each of you this morning. I paused. I'm telling you because I think it's only fair. You have a window. If there are things any of you need to address before that information becomes public, agreements to make, wrongs to acknowledge, changes to set in motion, this is the window. I looked at each of them. I'm not your enemy. I'm not anyone's enemy. I bought this ship for 12 credits because nobody else would, and it's turned out to contain something that belongs to everyone, not just the people who could afford to want it. I hope you all make good use of the time. I closed the channel. Marek set a course for the Admiral's coordinates. Course set. Estimated travel time, 8 hours at current power. Take us out. The Gray Wren disengaged from Bay 40 with the smooth, unhurried precision of a ship that had maintained its own maneuvering systems for 2 centuries and knew exactly what it was doing. The station fell away behind us. The 3 ships held, not following, not blocking. I watched them on the aft feed until the station was small. Marek, one more question. Yes. The Admiral, when she sees who you brought home, what do you think she'll say? Marek was quiet a moment. I think she will say that she did not expect you. And then, after a beat, and then I think she will say that she is glad it was you. Why? Because you did not fire back when they fired at us. And you did not use the archive the way it was designed to be used, as a tool for one group to hold over another. You found a third option within a few hours of boarding this ship. Admiral Vane spent 200 years preparing for someone to arrive with a plan. I do not think she expected the plan to come from the person, rather than the other way around. I looked at the stars ahead. I'm still a salvager with an expiring permit and 11 credits. Yes, I know, and the galaxy has no idea what to do with that. The Gray Wren moved through open space, steady and unhurried and completely, utterly ready. 8 hours, then everything. Outside, the stars were very still and very old and entirely unbothered by any of it. The way stars always are when the small, warm things moving between them are about to change something. I leaned back, the chair adjusted without a sound. 11 credits. I decided that was probably enough. Behind us already, the first of the 3 captains was sending a message to her authority that would arrive before we reached the admiral. And its contents, Marek noted in his usual calm, were unlike anything that captain had ever sent before. It was an offer, not to buy, not to threaten, not to maneuver. It was an offer to talk. Marek told me this as we traveled, and I listened, and I thought that maybe the archive wouldn't even need to be released. Maybe the fact that it existed, that it was known to exist, that a broke salvager who'd walked into a warm building to get out of the cold was carrying it in a ship he'd bought for 12 credits maybe, that was enough to change something without changing everything. Maybe. But I was still going to release it, because some things belong to everyone, and the longer they're kept by anyone in particular, the more damage the keeping does. Marek seemed to agree. He said nothing, but his reactor hum, in the quiet of those 8 hours, sounded like something that had been waiting to exhale for a very long time. And it did, and we flew on, and the galaxy waited, without knowing yet that it was waiting, for the moment when 200 years of listening finally came to light. I still had 11 credits. I thought that was a fine place to begin.